It is hard to believe it's the 21st century. Afghanistan in the summer of 2002 is like a scene out of biblical times. The country has not modernized as much as its Muslim neighbors. Donkeys, horse carts, and camels are still the primary mode of transportation for many Afghans. Most women still cover themselves from head to toe when out in public, despite the fall of the repressive Taliban regime. There are hints of contemporary development: cars, music, video salons. But the country remains isolated from the rest of the world because of the past 2 decades of war and conflict. The Soviets invaded and occupied the country during the 1980s. Afghan freedom fighters, or mujahideen, battled the Soviet forces. They were largely ineffective until they were supplied weapons by America and Arab countries. The heavily armed freedom fighters became warlords. Years of civil war, led by opposing warlords, followed the Communist Army's departure. In 1996, Taliban forces gained power and initially had the support of the people for their ability to stop the abusive warlord soldiers. The warlords then formed shifting alliances to fight the Taliban. Over these years, millions of Afghans fled their homes and country to escape the fighting.
Few Westerners knew much about Afghanistan until the September 11th attacks on America and the U.S.-led war to topple the Taliban and drive al-Qaeda out of the country. I made my first trip to Afghanistan in 1971, during a period of relative peace. Back then, I observed a culture that was warm and hospitable. It was a very poor country, but people were content. They had enough food to survive. I felt safe traveling throughout the country. I wondered what happened to the Afghanistan I first encountered, how the Afghanis had fared, and if they really had become the wild and dangerous people that media reports suggested. Now, 31 years later, I was returning with my wife Olga, a Pulitzer Prize-winning photojournalist who covered Central Asia while working for Associated Press.
Cliff and I wanted to see how these people were doing after more than 2 decades of war and liberation from the Taliban. We heard the country was at peace and refugees were returning, and we wanted to see for ourselves what that really meant. What we found shocked us. While America may have won the war against al-Qaeda and the Taliban, the people of Afghanistan are losing the struggle for peace. As we crossed the border from Uzbekistan into Afghanistan in June, the Afghani border guards seemed not quite comfortable in their new uniforms. In a country where allegiances change regularly, we wonder on which of the many sides of the Civil War this particular guard fought. On the way from the border to the city of Mazar-e-Sharif, we are stranded by desert sands blown over the road.
That's a rough road. This is still a super highway between Kabul.
But difficult road conditions and lack of transport don't stop hundreds of thousands of refugees anxious to return to their homeland. The tide of people is overwhelming aid providers and creating a crisis that grows more unmanageable by the day. In the past 4 months, Afghanistan has seen more than 1.2 million refugees return from neighboring countries like Iran and Pakistan, and 500,000 more could return by year's end. It's one of the largest and fastest voluntary migrations in history. Another 400,000 internally displaced persons, or IDPs, currently remain in camps within Afghanistan, unable to return home. At first, the refugees' quick return seemed an enormous victory, a reflection of Afghanistan's relative stability. But now, aid organizations and government officials say it's a disaster in the making. With no houses, jobs or food available back home, tens of thousands are flocking to refugee camps instead of their villages. But the camps are not equipped to handle the onslaught. Aid organizations that sponsor them are running out of money, and living conditions deteriorate daily. Compounding the problem, many Afghan IDPs continue to arrive in camps from the country's troubled northern regions, where fighting between warlords makes it too dangerous to stay. One camp experienced the onslaught is Saripul, a remote hamlet in northern Afghanistan, about 3.5 hours by car from Mazar-e-Sharif. The dusty road out of town seemingly leads to nowhere and is marked with a sign indicating a United Nations-sponsored Food for Work program, which several years ago was instrumental in the building of this road. The outskirts of this town is home to another group of Afghans. It's a squatters' camp for an estimated 5,000 IDPs, or internally displaced persons, who have little more than the clothes on their backs. These refugees have been displaced from their homes because of drought, the war against the Taliban, and more recently fighting between rival warlords. We talked to some who fled their village and homes in the Koyistan region about 11 months ago because of the fighting. Food distribution programs have been terminated at this camp, and it's been several months since these Afghans have been given a monthly ration of grain. A small medical clinic still functions nearby and helps coordinate a daily delivery of water to the residents of this shanty town. Through Abdul Aziz, the 38-year-old leader of this group, we learned of their plight. They say their quality of life is not worth living. On average, 1 person dies per day.
Swear to God, it'd be better if the Americans bombarded us. We didn't bring anything with us. There was war. We just wanted to bring our children and ourselves. We had to run.
Their homes are destroyed, their possessions looted, and their fields are barren. They can't move closer to the neighboring town because the local people don't want them. They're stranded with nothing.
Sister, please help us at least get a tent, because we are dying from the heat of the sun. Come and look. We don't even have a piece of bread to eat.
This is Haknya's Hal Halboy. She's 50 years old, also a refugee from the war-torn Koyistan province.
We thought we could get help here, but it's getting worse. We haven't eaten all day. We prayed to God and came here. We want God to help us. I swear we have nothing.
Ragged bits of cloth are the only protection Hawk and her family have against the hot summer sun and cold winter nights.
From the time we woke this morning, we haven't seen food. We haven't eaten all day.
The family depends on meager earnings for bread, their main staple, and relies on the charity of others to survive. A small quantity of tea is all the food this family has. Hawk carefully stores it in a corner of her headscarf. Peace Winds provided 500 high-quality tents several years ago for officially registered refugees. They were intended as temporary housing for people who left the rural villages because of drought. Despite the fact that camp administrators are trying to get people to leave, thousands of refugees still use them today, and an unofficial camp continues to grow with makeshift tents. Families lucky enough to get Peace Winds tents have better shelter than their neighbors a few yards away at the unofficial camp, but their lives are just as difficult. Kotaratola Saeed Torah, a 30-year-old man, shares his tent with his wife, 6 children, and extended family, including his mother, uncle, brother, and sister-in-law. The youngest is just 15 days old. They all fled their rural home a year ago when fighting against the Taliban broke out. Both his 60-year-old mother and his 70-year-old uncle have severe eye infections that started back at their village 3 years ago. There were no medical clinics to treat their eyes back home, and the infections progressed. At Saripul, a small medical clinic treats them, but it's too little, too late, and both suffer irreparable damage.
We've
been to other camps. We've been everywhere. We've been to Kabul, and finally we came here. We have nothing to go back to. We've been stuck here for a year. We're hungry.
They left their village because of war. Their house was destroyed. Their fields were destroyed. Their food and animals were stolen. They heard rumors of food distribution at Saripul and possibilities of work at the nearby town, so they came here. Work and money have been very scarce. Tea is rare for them. Food distribution programs have ended. To earn money for food, his wife weaves wool fibers into a crude animal harness, which she hopes to sell.
This is how much food we have. That's all we have for today. We have to split this up among everyone.
The only food this family of 12 will have all day is 2 loaves of bread and some dried-out morsels. The younger children get the fresher pieces, while the older members of the family eat the harder ones.
We're dying here. One day these children have food, then they don't the next day.
These are the surviving victims of war in Afghanistan. stuck between unbearable conditions in camps like Saripul, or life back in their village, which they believe will be no better.
Do something. I haven't seen a boiled onion in 15 days. God, why did you make us like this? Take us or give us life.
Cliff and I were stunned by the conditions we found at the Saripul camp, and we wanted to see if others were as bad. While we did find camps similar to Saripul, we were even more surprised by the different types of problems we found at the next camp. This is Saki Camp, a community of mud-walled homes about 20 minutes by car from Mazar-e Sharif. The Afghani National Aid Organization, known as Coordination for Humanitarian Assistance, created it several years ago for people who fled rural areas because of drought and civil war. It houses some 15,000 refugees who get shelter, food, water, schools and medical services. Camp administrators now want these refugees to return to their homes. 70-year-old Muhammad Ullah Akbar is an elder for 300 families from the Alborz mountain region. He's lived at the Saki camp for 11 months, and like many from his group, says he won't return to his village as camp administrators hoped.
What do you think? That if we go, there will be food to eat? If the United Nations takes care of our problems, we can go. Otherwise, we have nothing to go to.
Street number 13 of the camp is home to refugees from the Alborz mountains. Ahmed Kandigul is 45 years old. He, his wife, and 3 children say they too don't want to return to their village in the Alborz mountain region.
We're not running away from our land, but I don't have a donkey to bring water. How am I going to live there? We have no roof over our head. It's been 5 years since we left. Some have been back and say we don't have anything there.
Yonon works at the camp, and with his help, we learn why people would rather stay at the camp than return to their villages. Yonon asks if they want to go back to their home in Alborz. A promise of wheat distribution back home is not enough to satisfy this family's needs. They want to stay near the city, where they can find work for extra money.
If we go back there, it's like living in the desert. So we're happier here. Life is better here.
Access to water in most rural villages is very inconvenient compared to access in the Saki camp. Streams, rivers, and the occasional communal well are the source of water. It takes effort to hoist buckets of water, and more effort to carry them long distances. By contrast, fresh water flows freely at the Saki camp thanks to United Nations funding. There are spigots and water at several locations, so water is easily available for cooking, washing, and bathing. Residents at Saki camp also consider education for their children an important reason to stay. Schools and classrooms like this facility give both young girls and boys a chance to start or resume their education. Many villages still lack schools. 62-year-old Roland Cloudot and his wife Nude Nisso live at the Saki camp with their 3 surviving children. 3 other children have died over the last few years.
If we went back to our village, we don't have our fields. We don't have a donkey. We don't have our home. How are we going to survive there?
Afghans whose fields and houses are not destroyed by drought or war can work their fields, harvest crops, and provide a home for their families. Life is hard, but they survive. But refugees who lost their homes say they will perish. They have no fields to harvest, no pack animals to carry heavy loads and transport water, and no chances for jobs in their villages. So thousands of them flock to the city on a daily basis. They seek jobs as day laborers, doing back-breaking work for small sums of money, so they can earn enough to feed their families for another day. While some young boys follow their fathers into the city to hunt for odd jobs, other boys and girls find employment by making carpets at local factories. Their small hands and nimble fingers produce intricate designs and rugs that fetch high prices on the world market. They themselves earn only pennies a day, but it helps feed their families. An Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Assistance is located at the site where Director Muhammad Islam Yari oversees the operation of the camp.
We spoke to several families who are from the Alberz Mountains. Many of the families told us that life is better here at the camp than in the mountains in the village where they came from, that they want to stay.
Yes, this is also exactly right, but what should we do? We cannot continue the education, the health, and any other development in the camps. Camps is temporary place for the IDPs or for the people. We solve their problem in their origin place, not in the camp. The camp is a temporary place for the IDP. Because of it, the people now used to receive many foods free. It is since a long time that our people receive free food. Now they are used to. This is become their habitual. Now we are stop the emergency program. We are going to do the development program. We have to push or have to encourage these people to go to their villages and start the development programs.
Efforts to relocate families from the Saki camp to their village in the Alborz Mountains were postponed. Security problems plagued the countryside and slowed or stopped rural development efforts. At camps like Sarapul and Saki, the refugees at least feel safe. In the countryside, residents constantly worry about marauding bands of soldiers representing the various warlords who still vie for power. These soldiers carry weapons, and violent outbreaks are common.
They want to take your money. There's nothing left to take. Between all those people, soldiers of Jamiats and Uzbek and all the others, there was constant fighting. In one place you can have 10 different people fighting each other. There is no peace there. There is still war going on.
Scenes like this are common throughout the countryside. Soldiers come through town with their weapons, stealing what they can take from the villagers and leaving fear in their wake. Often soldiers from different factions cross paths, and misunderstandings escalate into gun battles. In April, 20 soldiers died in a battle near the first refugee camp we visited. In June, Uzbek and Tajik forces battled, leaving 150 families homeless. In August, 50 soldiers died in fighting between Tajiks and Pashtuns. 17 Uzbek and Tajik soldiers died during fighting in September 2002. One such outbreak took place in the town of Sholgara, not far from Mazar-e Sharif, a few days after our first visit to Saki camp. We went there hoping to better understand the problems and difficulties of rural security. In the case of the Sholgara gunfight, a member of Uzbek warlord Abdul Dostun's forces switched loyalties and went over to the Tajik warlord commander under Muhammad Atta. He brought one of Dostum's weapons along with him. That angered Dostum's commander, and the dispute escalated into a battle between 100 soldiers. We asked people along Sholgara's main street about the battle.
I saw 4 to 5 days ago how one man was shot and killed during a war in the bazaar. In the morning, there were very many soldiers with weapons, and by lunchtime, fighting broke out.
This is not peace.
Ruidar Akhbari is Sholgara's police chief. He was on duty the day of the killing on the dusty main street. Like so many other police chiefs in similar towns throughout Afghanistan, he is ill-equipped and unable to deal with the violence that often breaks out.
Now, we have a lot of weapons. We won't have a war if we have a strong government, if we gather all the weapons. Then it will be good. If this doesn't happen, then it will never be better than now. If they don't take away the weapons, war will continue. All the people anticipate big battles.
The skirmish in Sholgara illustrates the difficulties Afghanistan faces as it strives for peace. An entire generation of illiterate men, aged 18 through 30, has no skills beyond their training for war. Afghans are heavily armed with weapons, kept both as a cultural tradition and as leftovers from 2 decades of war. Many feel unsafe if they aren't armed. Even more consider guns a symbol of their status and manhood. In fact, they often say that they love their weapons as much as their wives. But guns aren't the only problem. Rusted tanks and heavy artillery lie abandoned by the roadside. But the warlords keep their good tanks and artillery ready for battle should the need arise. After 20 years of war, leftover landmines are a constant hazard. In fact, hidden explosives are so common that those areas demined by the international community are marked so villagers know which ones are safe. The government is trying to end the violence by sponsoring a weapons collection program. As of late July, 50,000 pieces had been collected, but the goal is to gather 1 million, and many Afghanis are reluctant to give their weapons up. The weapons collection program by the Karzai government has been a failure. Making matters worse, antagonism between warlords continues, and ethnic conflict is on the rise. President Hamid Karzai's fledgling government is still weak, so it has trouble exerting power over those warlords. and the United States has been sending mixed messages about how much of a role its peacekeeping force will play. Checkpoints throughout the country provide a visible reminder that maintaining security is an ongoing necessity. But not all checkpoints are government-run. In fact, some belong to the various warlords who are protecting their territory. Much of the tension in northern Afghanistan comes from a personal rivalry between two warlords, General Abdul Rashid Dostum and General Atta Muhammad. While both generals report to Afghanistan's new defense minister, each general represents a different ethnic group and have been long-time rivals. They united forces long enough to help defeat the Taliban and drive al-Qaeda out of Afghanistan. General Dostum is the Assistant Defense Minister for Afghanistan's new government under President Karzai. He's the traditional leader of Afghanistan's 1.8 million ethnic Uzbeks. In the northern Afghanistan province of Bal, General Dostum has become so powerful that he prints the money used throughout the region. His picture hangs on many significant buildings. His fortress is awe-inspiring. His army is strong and his ruthlessness is legendary. He also gets major support from the U.S. government. General Atta Muhammad is the military leader of the Tajik ethnic group, which form the backbone of the Northern Alliance. He is responsible for military affairs in northern Afghanistan under the newly formed government. He led the Tajiks in their fight against the Soviet army in the 1980s, when rival General Dostum was allied with the Communists. These old rivalries, combined with the current overlapping responsibilities, contribute to the difficult security conditions in northern Afghanistan. These problems are not confined to northern Afghanistan. Other parts of the country, with other competing warlords, have a similar lack of security. General Dostum's officers say they want peace. Humayun Fauzi is in charge of military affairs for Dostum.
You know that for 23 years there was a war in Afghanistan. You can't expect that within the last 6 months all the conflicts between these armed groups will be resolved. All these people are armed, and it's important that within the last 6 months all their issues would be resolved. We hope in the future these conflicts will not exist. American and UN forces are needed in Afghanistan because we still have armed forces in the country. Between them are conflicts that need to be resolved. Until the time they are disarmed, we want American forces and UN forces in Afghanistan. We hope that within the next year and a half, those weapons will be disarmed.
But they don't want it at the expense of their own power.
We don't want it to be that the central government gives a command and we must fulfill it. These governments that will be in Afghanistan's future need to create a place for important people like General Dostum.
But Dostum's people won't put down their arms until everyone else does.
If the lawyer Jirga just asks us to turn in our weapons, but allows everybody else to keep them, we are not willing to do that.
General Atta's forces also claim to favor peace and the laying down of weapons. Saeed Wasah Ullah is an army general reporting to Atta and is responsible for the northern region of Afghanistan.
The first and important decided in Loya Jirga, the disarming. This is the first and important decide. I have 1,000 soldiers, and if I'm ready to get all of the weapon to central government, my soldier is ready. When Mr. Atta is ready, he has 21,000 soldiers right now, armed soldier. If he is ready, soldier is also ready. I'm right now tired from war.
But if need be, Attah's forces are ready to take up arms again.
We fight for 6 hours with these people also. Also, if anybody more want to come to Afghanistan and want to give some part of Afghanistan, we are ready for fight for our country.
That is precisely what worries people in the cities and universities throughout Afghanistan. At the recently reopened Balkh University, teachers and students had much to say about Afghanistan's prospects for peace.
And all our people don't want to see that their young generation having guns and weapons on their hands.
Third-year English teacher Mohammed Shah expresses his concerns.
For the time being, we need United Nations soldiers. We need, because now this is the new established government. It is going to be a new established government in near future. We need someone to support us, because during 23 years fighting, many troops who are together right now, they had fighting with each other previously. It's very difficult for us to catch or to understand each other in very short time. We need United Nations soldiers to be in our country until we have a powerful government, peaceful condition, and a very powerful and strong defense minister to lead all the countries.
I am a student at the university in law and political science.
Do you think that there is peace now in Afghanistan and that it will continue to be peaceful?
Yes, right now the peace is existing in Afghanistan since the foreigners have come here. Also, if our people, our commanders, do like the peace and they remove their guns, it will continue.
And do you think if peacekeeping forces leave, that there will be peace in Afghanistan?
Absolutely no, and this first time, because there are a lot of commanders who don't want to lose their finding of money.
The problems associated with too many weapons in the wrong hands are compounded by the fact that it is difficult to get confirmed reports of fighting between warlords and attacks on civilians, especially in the rural areas. Sholgara's police chief admits,
People are afraid to talk to journalists and authorities about these things because the two local commanders are very bad. If they talk about fighting and deaths, soldiers could come to their house at night and kill them. If you ask the people, they will say they don't want war. The common person wants for their children to attend schools, they want medical clinics, they want peace and goodness. They don't want war.
These are a small but representative group of the more than 1 million refugees now dislocated in Afghanistan. During Afghanistan's war against the Russian occupation, America sent hundreds of millions of dollars of weapons to the Mujahideen. These weapons, and the abandoned Russian weapons following their defeat, helped fuel the brutal civil war that followed. The Taliban came to power to end the civil war between rival warlords armed by America, Russia, and the Arab world. The Taliban captured many of these weapons. In 2001, the Americans joined forces with the warlords to drive the Taliban from power. Again, America poured huge quantities of weapons into the hands of the warlords. The Taliban were defeated, but the weapons remain. The Afghan war is not over, and villages outside the capital are not safe. The huge quantity of weapons choking Afghanistan help create the conditions that face these people now. As long as the weapons remain, the refugee problem will continue to worsen.